Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Student Involvement and Careers, Virtual Collegia, and Alumni UBC, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you in attendance today. We appreciate you being here to participate in this exciting talk with one of our alumni, Sarah Richter. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge that UBC is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. My name is Grant, and I'm a member of the Student Alumni Council. For more information about that council, you can follow us on social media at UBC SAC. I'll be moderating today's Alumni Office Hour. At Alumni UBC, the CSINC, and the Virtual Collegia program, we understand the value of mentorship and building community, particularly during times of high stress. We hope to use these virtual alumni collegia office hours as a tool to help first-year students address their fears, make connections, expand their community, and be mentored in a safe, small group setting by UBC alumni. As you may know, the CSINC supports students throughout your academic journey by connecting you to experiences, resources, and people that will help you achieve your personal and career goals. They offer a variety of programming, including orientations such as the Virtual Collegiate program that many of you are a part of this year, mentoring, volunteer and leadership opportunities, and workplace learning. You can visit students.ubc.ca to learn more about the center and services. Today's Alumni Office Hour is a partnership with the UBC Hub of 10,000 Coffees. With 10,000 Coffees, students can connect with a network of over 3,000 other students and alumni to develop their skills and build their network. This event will be recorded through GoToWebinar, and the video will be available after the event through CSINC. All participants are muted for the duration of the event. We'll have a Q&A opportunity in the second half, where you are welcome to type in your questions at any point during the presentation in the Questions tab, and I'll present them to Sarah in our Q&A portion. Your questions will remain anonymous if they are typed in. Please keep your questions short and concise, as it will provide us with an opportunity to answer more of your questions. Now, I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Sarah Richter. Sarah graduated from UBC in 2017 with a Bachelor's in Kinesiology and is now a Student Epidemiologist at the Public Health Agency of Canada. In this talk, Sarah will share her story about her experience as a first-year student at UBC and the lessons she learned that became useful to her career and life after leaving university. I'll now turn things over to Sarah.
Great, thanks so much for that introduction, Grant. So we've got a presentation that'll go along with this, and I'm essentially going to guide you, of course, through my first year experience, but the rest of my time at UBC as well, and all the things that you can look forward to. I, of course, acknowledge that my experience was just one of thousands of past kinesiology students, and I know that place, and specifically being at UBC, holds different value this year with so many things being virtual. So I'm really going to try to focus on my relationships and experiences that developed throughout my time at UBC. So first, I'll give you a little background on who I am. Andrea, if you could click through the slides, please. Thank you. So I'm originally from Kelowna, BC, and made the decision to move out to Vancouver after I graduated high school in 2013. Initially, I didn't actually know what kinesiology was, and it was my mom, who's a social worker of all people, who thought I might be interested. Some of the things that drew me to it were, in high school, I had been injured in some sports. I had taken some applied placement and health sciences courses, and I was also just very interested in living an active lifestyle and supporting other folks in doing that too. As Grant already said, I'm currently studying at the University of Toronto and right now working as a student epidemiologist at the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm one term away from completing my master's, which is pretty crazy. And some of my past work experience includes working as a registered kin in student affairs, spinal cord injury research, and health education. And a little bit more about me, I'm someone who loves playing team sports, and intramurals at UBC were huge. I love snow sports like snowboarding. I love dogs, peanut butter, chocolate, and I'm a huge NBA fan, love tuning into games as well. So next I'm going to dive into what my first year looked like. So given I was from a different city, I did live in residence, and that was my first exposure to UBC and my chance to get involved. So with that first opportunity, I definitely jumped at it and joined House Council, which was a chance to work with other students on different floors in our houses to plan programs. But through residence, I was also connected with other kin students, and I still remember to this day, the very first day I moved into residence, one of the first people I met was in kin and is still an incredibly close friend to this day. Besides residence, I also got involved with the Kinesiology Undergraduate Society, and specifically with the street team. One thing that I loved about being on the street team was that I got to know students in other year levels within kinesiology, and I would call it informal mentorship, I guess, that I've received from them, and just getting to know them in a more casual environment definitely guided me and helped me succeed throughout my time at UBC. Intramurals was another way that I really got to know those upper year students. And again, some of them I still consider close friends and great mentors. Specifically, I was involved in playing soccer and volleyball, and I was exposed to ultimate frisbee. Wasn't something that a lot of people played in Kelowna previously, so it was exciting to take part in that. And like many other kin students, I was motivated to seek opportunities outside of school. So in addition to taking my core courses and some science electives, I started volunteering with the Resource Center at ICORD, and that stands for the International Collaboration on Repair Discoveries. And that was just a chance to dip my toes in the water at a place that was focusing on research and getting to know all that was going on there. And this photo that I have right here, I know it would have been virtual for you this year, but it's from Imagine Day. And it reads, "I am imagining a kin experience that," and it was on our very first day that we're already thinking about what will the next 4 years or 5 or 6 look like at UBC. And again, another day that's been very memorable up until now. Also reflecting on first year, with each year I wanted to talk about what a favorite class was, my biggest lesson. So in first year, I definitely enjoyed Intro to Anatomy and Physiology. And as for the biggest lesson that I learned, I knew a lot of people thought UBC would be pretty intimidating, but you benefit from all the services that a large campus has to offer, and you also get that very tight-knit community and kin. So moving on to my second year at UBC, I sought a lot more involvement in kinesiology this year. So one group in particular, we just existed for 1 year, and it was called the Community Health Science Center Action Committee. And our work has essentially continued to this day in different capacities, but what we were focused on was getting kinesiology in actual building besides War Memorial and Osborne, which I'm not too sure if you've all had the chance to visit them, but on campus they're quite far from each other. And we really didn't have that sense of a home on campus. So we were working on getting a referendum passed. Again, that was another great opportunity in which there were students in different year levels that all worked together on this group of about 10 of us. So the mentorship definitely played into this as well. With orientations, I wanted to stay involved on Imagine Day throughout my undergrad, so I took part in Bod Squad, in which we essentially supported orientation leaders throughout the day and still got to know first years. And Kin Games, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and I'm excited to say is actually happening virtually this year. We hosted Kin Games in 2015 at UBC, and I got to be an ambassador for the University of Manitoba. So that's a photo there of me and the team. Additionally, I wanted to take part in some more meaningful volunteer experience. So this is where I got involved with the Physical Activity Research Center, which is also at ICORD. It's essentially an adaptive gym for people with different spinal cord injuries, so that includes spina bifida, MS, in addition to traumatic SCI. And of course, it started out as a space where I could just get in some volunteer hours and work with a clinical population, but as you can see, I spent 4, almost 5 years there, and the community really became a place outside of UBC that I could call home as well. I know there's a picture here as well that just shows what the space looks like. So it's full of adaptive equipment. It is actually open still and a place that students can seek volunteering even during the pandemic, because again, we've got to support everyone's health, even those that require an adaptive setting. As for my biggest lesson from second year, as you can see here, I did take on a lot and get involved. And even though it was still core courses in which you're working with your peers and going through them all together, I definitely did feel that I got a bit too involved and it did harm me a bit academically. So moving forward from that, I wanted to make sure that any experiences I had were very meaningful and I really enjoyed doing. As for my favorite class that year, I really enjoyed health policy and society. I think the courses might have shifted a bit in terms of title or course code now, but that was actually my first exposure to public health. So going into kin, I was definitely thinking about entering the rehab sciences after, but getting to see the population level perspective of implementing physical activity or rehab with older adults in home settings or marginalized communities was a really awesome experience in that class. Then moving on to my third year. So I really took that last lesson in terms of finding the involvements that I cared about the most. So continuing with that orientation involvement, I was a leader and I got to meet 7 to 8 first-year kin students that year. And again, some of them I've still connected with. I know it used to be called way back in the day MUG, which stood for my undergraduate group, and we'd refer to them as Muggies. And it was a great way to stay connected with a student in the year level 1 or 2 years above you. So that was, of course, a great experience that I wanted to continue with. Academically, this was also the year that you got to start taking electives and meeting your stream requirements. I was in the kinesiology and health sciences stream. And again, I know that the streams have slightly changed, but what my stream focused on was kin courses with lab components, in addition to taking some science electives. So I know I was continuing to take human motor behavior 2, biomechanics 2, and getting that lab experience, I definitely attribute to helping me professionally in the world of kin, because you really get that hands-on experience. Something else I began in my third year, which I think was one of the most rewarding experiences for me, and folks can get involved earlier in their second year too, was working as a student athletic trainer with our varsity women's field hockey team. It was, of course, a fun team to be with because they've been very successful in the past and won many national championships. But in addition to applying some like athletic taping and injury assessments that we were learning simultaneously, it was a great way to meet a group of students that you otherwise wouldn't meet through kinesiology. And I know that tonight there's probably folks here that aren't in kin as well. So there's definitely opportunities to branch outside of kin and get to know other students. With this team, I really enjoyed my experience. And again, I love following these athletes to this day. Some of them have continued to go on and play professional sports. And again, intramurals was something that continued to be part of my life. So if you look closely at that bottom image, it does say Bi-Kinning on it, which was the name of a soccer team that we had going for a few years. So sports was definitely a big part of third year. My biggest lesson from third year was the fact that you will develop relationships early on, like whether you're someone who got the chance to live in residence or meeting people on Imagine Day, but you're definitely not limited by that. So I found throughout third and fourth year, I became increasingly close with people in kin, whereas before I was closer with folks outside of it. As for my favorite class that year, that was Introduction to Athletic Training. And again, another very hands-on based class that you'll get to do following first year, where you can learn some taping, learn some assessments, and really put that to use afterwards. Moving on to my fourth year, I know for some folks this might look like a fifth or sixth year, and honestly I'm surprised I squeezed this all into 4, but I sort of moved up in terms of what we did with orientations, and I became a squad leader that year. So we were in charge of the orientation leaders and supporting them in guiding first year students. That is a photo of me and my 4 fellow squad leaders. Unfortunate, but about a year or so after this, Laura, the girl who's second from the right, did pass away in a tragic plane accident with her parents out here in Ontario. So it's another lesson that I learned throughout, where developing those strong relationships was really important. You learn how fragile life is, but you also can reflect on those great experiences that you've had with other people in your program. Other parts of fourth year that I took part in, throughout third and fourth year, you have the chance to apply for some awards and prizes in kinesiology. There's a lot available, and a lot of alumni like myself might even contribute to some of them. So I was lucky enough and successful to receive the Ellen Juristovsky Memorial Award, which went to someone who was interested in medicine as well as pursued a lot of meaningful volunteer activities. And as much as we don't all need praise for things we've done, it definitely was something that made me feel like the opportunities I had decided to focus on were really paying off. The summer prior to fourth year, I also began a work-learn role, and this sort of perpetuated that involvement with public health. So it was the health education that I worked on in terms of building placement curricula for all of the health discipline students at UBC. Work-learn you can get involved with earlier, even at the end of your first year. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they're open now, but in March, work-learn is a great opportunity to get paid well as a student while also working limited hours so you can manage your course load on top of that. The last thing I got involved with in fourth year was something that we sort of pioneered, but it was called the Sports Science Symposium. It's great to take pride in the fact that UBC Kin is the #1 Kin sports science program in Canada, and we have a lot of great work going on, but it wasn't necessarily being showcased at the time. So this was a way for us to contact both individuals in the Greater Vancouver community and those on campus. And this past year, I know they were also able to continue it virtually, but it was a way to showcase and for students to learn about what was out there in the world of sports science and how they could get involved. We also have a very rich athletics program, so that was a great way to showcase the success that we've had with our university as well. And then lastly, I've just got one picture on here. I know that intramurals and recreation, of course, looks very different this year, but when you are able to return to in-person things on campus, Storm the Wall is one of those keystone rec events. And I was encouraged by someone early on in my degree to do what's called the Iron Woman category, or Iron Person, and you essentially complete all 3 legs of this mini triathlon yourself, and then with the help of a tall friend, get over this 12-foot wall at the end. Again, that goes to show how strong the relationships are that you'll build within kin and how you can motivate each other to achieve things you thought you probably couldn't. Following that, my experiences in kin, of course, did not end after I graduated, but I stayed connected on campus and continued to work. Andrea, if you could just click through to the next 2 slides. So I did stick around and work in residence as a residence coordinator. And the reason that I did this was it was a great opportunity to develop soft skills and support work for students, such that I could apply that in patient care work in the future, given that's what a lot of kin students do want to pursue. I found it very helpful. I also continued my involvement at Park as a supervisor and changed up the training that we do for student volunteers. So I was able to integrate both my spinal cord injury knowledge as well as some of the skills that I had learned, again, soft skills specifically. I also got connected with someone who was recently hired through the School of Kin, who was an alumni engagement coordinator. We hadn't had one for a while, and she and I connected, and we actually got a young alumni committee up and running, and I know it's still going to this day. They've had some successful virtual events in the past year, but that was a way to make me feel connected to my peers who were in lower years and had just graduated, as well as those that had finished school a few years before me. Lastly, another thing that I wanted to highlight that I just took recent involvement in, but a lot of kin students might take the opportunity to do a directed study, which is sort of like a mini honors program or a thesis. And it was related to Park, in which one of the current supervisors was looking at how beneficial that community space was for us. So I got to provide my perspective as a volunteer. And I sort of skipped over it with fourth year, but I want to touch again on those lessons that I got closer to the end of my degree. And it's really to emphasize that you have at least 4 years. Again, some folks take more. With events like Storm the Wall or Dave the Longboat, let's say, They're really fun, but if you don't take part in them in your first few years, it's definitely not something to get too upset about because you've got so much time at UBC and there's so much that you can fit in your time there. I also ended off my degree with my favorite courses being neuroanatomy with Mark Carpenter, as well as chronic health issues, physical activity, and community practice, which again was one of those courses that really focused on the actual role of being a kin in the community. So with that, that sort of summarizes everything up until this point in time in which I've started a graduate program and I've almost finished it. But thanks so much for listening to me chat about my UBC experience. If you want to reach out, here's my email, and now we're happy to take any questions from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was such a wonderful presentation. And as Sarah said, it is now time for our audience Q&A. So for those of you in the audience today, you can submit questions in the question tab of your GoToWebinar application. And again, yeah, thank you for such a wonderful presentation. It's really cool to see the things that you got up to in your undergraduate degree and the things that and how it's applied to your postgrad work. Very, very exciting. Awesome. So we've got some questions here. The first one, you were quite involved on campus and off campus. How did you find these opportunities?
A lot of these opportunities I did have to seek out myself, but some of them you'll actually notice that professors and classes will share them. I'm not too sure who's teaching Intro to Anatomy and Physiology these days, but Tanya Lamb, who taught it in my year, Kin 190, she actually shared with us at the end of term. She shared Park with us and told us a bit about it. So that's an example of one where a prof touches on it, and also the importance of getting to know your profs and the opportunities that they might have for students to get involved. I think a lot of the other opportunities I definitely came across from building those relationships with upper year students, hearing what they did, thinking about what I might be interested that they had previously done. And the other great thing about UBC is there's so many resources available such that if there is an opportunity you want to take on that doesn't exist, you can definitely find the student or funding to support that. But overall, I'd say a combination of me looking to my upper year peers as well as just doing some searching on my own.
Awesome, thanks for that answer. And I believe it still is Tanya Lamb teaching Intro to Anatomy. I remember taking that course. It was one of my favorite ones. Yeah, and that's awesome to hear. Having that experience and communicating with everybody that's in the kin community, I'm sure has there's a lot of shared experiences, and there's a lot of people venturing inside kin, outside kin. There's a lot of opportunities there. With all of your involvements, how did you manage to balance those and academics?
Yeah, I know everyone's always going to tell you this, that time management is super key. But even if it takes time to get good at it, I'll admit, and that's what my biggest lesson was after second year. I had taken on a lot because I still wasn't too sure what I was interested in. It did take some experimenting. But with that time management, you have to figure out, of course, meeting your requirements that you need to graduate and taking electives that meet your interest, but also getting involved outside and then reflecting on those opportunities and making sure they're things that you enjoy going to. You don't want to not show up one week. So making sure that those things are very meaningful. Those are things that you will then be able to make the time for because you know that you benefit as well as those who you might be working with. Personally, in terms of time management and scheduling, I'm someone that does rely a lot on my technology and calendars, and just making sure that I can lay everything out in a week, look at the time I have, and then schedule in the study time especially. It's one thing to, of course, go to your classes and go and volunteer or go to a meeting, but you've got to make sure that there's still that study time outside too.
Yes, of course. Scheduling in time for studying is very important. And I know sometimes if you've got some meetings and classes going on, it's really important to keep that time in mind as well.
These days,
We've got
especially, I'm sure folks are experiencing the Zoom fatigue, and seeking that involvement, if it is virtual, can definitely be taxing. So these days, it might even be more beneficial to make sure that you're not taking on as much as you could potentially in person.
Yes, absolutely. Zoom fatigue is definitely a thing, as I've come to realize in this current term. Yeah, taking some time, I think something that's been beneficial for me is just taking some time to get away from the computer, whether that's studying from like your textbook or taking your textbook somewhere else and studying maybe in the library or out on a walk or something like that. We've got another question here. What were you most worried about as a first-year student? And is there anything that you wish you had done early in your university career that you were too nervous to do?
So sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes. What were you most worried about as a first-year student?
Honestly, I think what I was most worried about wasn't even relating to academics, because I had come in from some advanced placement courses and felt pretty comfortable with the material. And I know that often is something that first year students are concerned about, but I was much more concerned about the social aspect. And that's mainly because I came out of high school as someone who was much quieter and shy, wasn't too sure how I'd meet folks if I didn't have the right places and opportunities to do so. But again, looking back on it, I definitely grew as a person. That became easier over time, but was definitely a big worry. And then the other question was about something that something I wish I had done earlier, but was maybe nervous to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that also goes back to the social piece in terms of getting to know folks. And I think about how when I first started out in residence, it was a very comfortable space. It was where I lived, it was home. So it was much easier to get to know folks there. And again, I found the shyness really affecting my ability to connect with other kin students. So even though I'd have friends to sit with in class, I maybe wouldn't stick around as long after class. And these days, even in my graduate program, I've learned that having that time before or after class just to hang out with your peers is beneficial to get to know them. So I definitely wish I had gone out of my way earlier on to get to know my peers and kin. But again, looking back, I saw that I had plenty of time to really grow those relationships.
I see. Yeah. We've got another question here. What were some challenges that you faced either during your time as a undergraduate student or during your postgraduate studies?
So something that I was worried about.
Well, maybe some challenges that you faced
I'm
and maybe
sorry.
how you overcame those challenges. Yeah.
Okay. Um, in terms of challenges, I think I was definitely not too sure what I wanted to do afterwards. Again, a lot of kin students are extremely motivated, and I was to start out too, and they're very driven to, enter the rehab sciences or something of the like afterwards. But I found myself slowly falling out of love with the idea of going to physio, because I mean, it's something that students will learn about, but just getting to understand the private setting versus the public setting, and that was really affecting how I was going to decide what I wanted to do afterwards. So that challenge I overcame by taking a few courses that I probably wouldn't have thought of when I first entered. So taking some psychology courses that were more neurological, disease-based, as well as biomedical ethics. And given those were courses a lot of my peers hadn't taken, it was a chance to really explore another area. And I found that helped me overcome the challenge of figuring out what I wanted to do. I think another challenge as well, again, I'm sure lots of students experience it in first year, but in regards to academic success, it is very important to build relationships with professors and faculty. But I think students like to keep to themselves, and they're nervous that they might ask the wrong thing or that they'll ask for some help on something and be told that you have to figure it out yourself. So definitely took me a couple years to build up the courage to go and actively seek that support from profs and faculty. And again, I think one of the reasons that I was able to overcome that challenge was I learned of the positive relationship some of my peers already had with those faculty.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, one thing I love that you mentioned is just reaching out to support from those professors. I think they've got so much to offer, and it's something, a resource that may be underutilized during the undergraduate degree. One question that I actually have after what you said there, when you were thinking about making this decision between physiotherapy and public health types of initiatives, did you take those extracurricular courses in psychology and biomedical ethics to help answer the question, or were those courses just electives that you looked up, saw were a little interesting, and then you came to the conclusion afterwards?
I'd say it's a bit of both. Um, I mean, you definitely reach a point where if you've like met all the requirements, you have to graduate and you're still looking for a few courses just to fill some final credits. You definitely want to see just what's interesting and what catches your eye. But I think those were also topics that I had first been exposed to. Again, the ethics piece back in health policy and society in second year, and really getting to know ethical principles and decision making when it came to healthcare decisions. So given that was my first exposure to public health, that's what drove me to take that course. And as for some of the psych courses as well, even though it was both that it was interesting, but also that it really piqued my interest in neurological conditions. Again, I had peers that had taken courses with certain profs or had just taken a certain subject and really enjoyed it and spoke highly of them.
Okay, very cool. Thank you for answering that. Um, Regarding your job opportunities and everything that you've gone through in your undergraduate degree, including I-Cord, residence life, and then work learn, what were your strategies for finding those job opportunities within your undergraduate degree and then after graduation as well?
Mhm. During undergrad, I know there's so many opportunities that students probably see that are interesting, and then it will say, experience with a certain program that you need or minimum number of months or years experience, and that's definitely something that's tough to acquire early on in undergrad. And you know what, the first time I applied to WorkLearn after my second year, I wasn't successful with it. So it did take some gaining more volunteer experience. I also acknowledge too that depending on some students' socioeconomic status, the only option might be to search for work instead of volunteer opportunities. But for me, I was fortunate enough that I could use those volunteer opportunities to gain experience and eventually get something that looked more like a job. Some other strategies actually goes back to the Center for Student Involvement and Careers, but there was a one time where I was just feeling down on my luck and did want some advice on my resume and cover letter. Thankfully, when you get more into kin and the rehab sciences, it's really not about like what were the names of the places you worked at, what were all the things that you accomplished, but it's really just what are your hard skills and your soft skills that you can apply to work with patients and in a healthcare team. But through the CSINC, the first career advisor I spoke to referred me to another who actually used to work with athletes who were coming out of or going into retirement from sports, but then entering professional careers. So she was someone who had a bit more knowledge on where the resources were that would guide folks to more of like the health or sports science-based jobs. So that was a skill that, or a search strategy that I didn't initially have, but again, was just referred to the right person for that. And besides that, again, as tedious as it can be to continue spending more time online, just doing some cold searches online, it can really help in terms of finding what's out there for opportunities.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. That's very insightful. I appreciate your perspective on those. We've got another question here, and this is again related to a little bit of professional development and seeking job opportunities. What sorts of professional development opportunities exist in kin, whether on campus or off campus?
Mm-hmm. I think this has definitely evolved since I've been in kin at UBC, but I've seen even the KUS has really started to add in a lot more professional development opportunities. One opportunity that I had was Dr. Barry Lee, who taught intro to athletic training as well as strength and conditioning, was that he was connected with someone who led functional movement skills training. So it did come at a cost, but that was an opportunity for folks to gain some more hands-on skills. And again, you know, a couple more letters to put after your name or something to put on a resume. That was great, but you want to make sure that if you're investing in those courses, they're things that you actually like and want to use. But yeah, so again, relationships with professors will lead to finding opportunities to develop professionally. If students do get involved in something like the Work Learn program, much like working for any large organization like UBC, there's a lot of resources that are out there for students to continue developing in their roles professionally. And a lot of the onboarding that someone might do as a volunteer or as a staff member at UBC pertains to professional development. Again, I don't know if these are still offered, but I know that I can't even remember the name of the office at this point, but it was UBC Health related and specifically mental health related. And they had opportunities like mental health first aid and assist, which is applied suicide intervention skills training. I know that might not seem like it's very professional development related, but it's something that can be placed in any setting. So mental health is, of course, something that folks are paying a lot more attention to these days. And I think those are things that can help folks stand out professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you mentioned those opportunities that exist on UBC, specifically those around mental health. Um, from my understanding, I know that the KUS is now offering like some courses along with mental health opportunities, probably similar to the ASSIST program, but the QPR suicide prevention program, as well as there's a lot of opportunities for those of you tuning in at students.ubc.ca. There's a lot of information there about mental health resources on campus, and way to get involved, as well as professional development opportunities. We've got a question here. After graduation, how did you decide to pivot away from physio and towards health sciences, specifically public health?
Yeah, so coming out of UBC, I spent that first year working in student affairs. And after that, that's when I got involved more as a registered kinesiologist. I specifically I did start working at a clinic for a few months, but unfortunately had a poor relationship with the supervisor and it wasn't the best or the healthiest work environment for me. So I pivoted to home health, which I did enjoy. But I think I found, and this isn't anything relating to the UBC KIN program per se, but kinesiologists in BC are at least becoming increasingly recognized as healthcare providers. And out in Ontario, they're actually represented by a college, so they're on the same level as all allied health professions. But I think doing that work as a kin, I definitely saw the limitations to working in some of those rehab roles, and specifically as a kin where we maybe didn't have all of the right training that other folks did. But I think in BC, I found a huge drive towards people in physio working in private. I mean, it makes sense in that, you know, you see more clients, you have a better wage. And I know that I was just loving the public setting a lot more. And unfortunately, it didn't seem like physio at UBC at least would lead me towards those opportunities in that province. So again, public health is something that's exposed me to learning a bit more about how health services even differ across all of the provinces. But I think that private clinic experience, it's both what made me fall in love with physio when I experienced my first indoor soccer injury, but I think I also started falling out of love with it too. And that's not to say though that had I gone into physio, you know, I definitely would like to encourage and empower folks that if they see that there's something that's missing in a clinic or in the profession as a whole, to definitely advocate for it. But I think I was just sort of getting fatigued a bit by the same clinic setting. It was definitely rewarding to continue working with patients, and I know I'm still thinking about going back and doing patient care in addition to public health. But I think another reason that drove me away from physio and towards public health is the fact that it's population based. And I know a lot of people, when they go into any health profession, say like, oh, I want to do this because I enjoy helping people. And you do get that immediate gratification when you see someone like improve with rehab exercises. But with public health, it is much more of a delayed gratification thing, but you're seeing population level and much larger changes when you're able to implement policies or like find trends in injuries or disease.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. Um, Speaking a little bit more about the opportunities that you had immediately after graduating with a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, um, how did you approach the decision between work experience versus graduate school? I know you mentioned a little bit now that you're considering a little bit getting back into patient care to some extent. What was that decision like for you about continuing developing work experience or pursuing graduate school?
I'm someone who comes from a very academic family, and my dad got a master's and has 3 degrees in total from UBC. So I'm someone who's very much raised in a setting where I grew to love the school and academic environment. And I definitely missed that after a couple years of work and was wanting to get back into that environment. But that's not to say that I just went to grad school because I wanted to be in school again. I think at that point, I felt that I had quite a wealth of knowledge, both from fields outside the health sciences that really grew me as a leader and a professional, but also experiences in the health sciences that made me realize what the biggest burdens are in terms of human health these days. And I was just at a point where I felt that any of the experience that I could get with my Bachelor of Kinesiology, if I wasn't to continue with patient care, had prepared me to enter a graduate program and feel very confident in my ability to do well academically, but also to just be very passionate about the work and making sure it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, wonderful. Now moving forward with your public health degree and your interest there, before getting involved with postgraduate studies, what kind of opportunities existed within that realm with your bachelor's degree in kinesiology?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of opportunities, and I know initially it looks like you can just work as a kinesiologist, but if you've worked in that kind of role for a few years, you can grow enough hours to work towards being an exercise physiologist. It's not something that you necessarily study for in university, but you do need a certain number of clinical hours. A lot of kin and physio and OT work is also involved in like work safe claims as well as ICBC and motor vehicle collisions. So with that, a lot of folks in kin even eventually start working for those provincial organizations. Again, something that folks might not know a lot about when they first leave the program. I'd be interested to know if those topics are being covered more. But I have some friends that did the co-op program throughout undergrad, and through that they were able to learn a bit more about those different opportunities. But besides that, I would say like in the lower mainland specifically, or even the interior where I was from, there were, I guess we could say like chains of clinics or chains of healthcare companies like Lifemark and Bayshore who always needed kins on their team, as well as some clinics and more so like performance-based gyms where folks could also go if they were more interested in, again, that performance side versus clinical work.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for answering that. I'm approaching my final term in kinesiology, so this is something that's been on my mind a lot, and having conversations with my peers about the options and the doors that open with a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. So that's very exciting to hear. We could hop into a couple general questions about your experience at UBC again. Um, talking about your experience at UBC, what is one important life lesson that you would attribute to your educational experience at UBC?
One important life lesson, and I think this honestly applies to anyone who's coming out with an undergrad from UBC or just any great Canadian institution, but critical thinking. And I think especially in a pandemic where we're presented with a lot of misinformation, critical thinking is so important. You know, whether you're looking at the latest literature that's on, ACL repair and injury, or if you've gone into something like management, you're trying to see like what are the best theories to apply in leading a team. Critical thinking is so important to make sure that the information you're receiving is of the highest quality, to make sure it's reliable and valid, but also just in everyday interactions as well. Again, the misinformation of the pandemic, but you never know who you're going to run into and what kind of information or fact they're going to share with you. But by being a critical thinker, you can really make decisions for yourself that are in your best interest and also reflect the most accurate work that exists.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that when you talk about misinformation, that you brought up like information about an ACL injury or like management stuff like that, because when I first came to UBC, I probably would have considered myself a pretty strong, like critical thinker, but I hadn't really applied that critical thinking to things that looked professional and academic academic to me. I was always thinking about just like mainstream like news sources and stuff like that, but it wasn't until it was actually in an English class where I was looking at a peer-reviewed academic article and everything like that, and I was just taking word for word what it was saying, and then my professor came back at me with just like, you should maybe be a bit more critical about what this person is saying, and don't just passively take in that information. So I think that's something that I've appreciated, like you said, at an institution like UBC, that you can take away from it is that critical thinking in all of the information that we consume. Yeah.
I know these days as well, statistics and research methods in kinesiology have become mandatory courses. They were ones that I did have to take to meet my stream requirements. Going through them, not everything is material that you will necessarily be using in the future, but there are still very important pieces from it. Again, like going back to if you're looking at injury-related literature, if you've read one study, you've read one study, and you've got to make sure that there's other work out there that validates it. So I hope folks even now, even after your first year, you watch the news and the news anchor's like, there's one study that recently was published that says X, Y, and Z, but again, that's just one experience, potentially just one case. So you've got to take that with a grain of salt and really think about what all else is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I've taken away from the research methods course is that how drastic some of the research methods and ethics have changed over the years, especially in a developing area such as like sports medicine and sports science and stuff like that. So it's important to make sure you check out that methods section to see how valid those responses really are. We can hop into some KUS related things. How was your experience within the KUS? Would you recommend it for people that are joining the kinesiology community? And how did it impact your UBC experience and how you connected with your peers?
I mean, I would recommend it, but it's also, again, not every experience is for everyone, but you can at least still attend KUS events and gain a bit of exposure to figure out if it's the right space for you. I acknowledge as a first year, it can seem a bit intimidating. Fourth and fifth years are probably running the council and you feel like there's such an age gap between you or such a knowledge gap, but in reality, the reason the people are execs in the KUS is because they love what they do and they want to give back to all of the other students. So if you're looking for a way to give back to the kin community, getting involved with the KUS and its subcommittees is definitely a great way to do so. If you're someone who, as well, I'm sure online it's definitely difficult to build those relationships with your peers, but involvement in extracurriculars are a great way to get to know folks. I know it might seem that you're getting to know them through like a work-related program versus just getting to know them casually, but those social relationships will definitely develop. I'm not too sure what the KUS event landscape looks like these days, but I mean, I've heard that it's Kin Week, so you can always, check out their events as a great indicator to see if it's the right place for you. And the other thing is, if you seek involvement in it one year and you don't like it, you can always just choose to get involved with other things in the following years. But if you love it, again, that's what keeps drawing folks back. And that's why some execs have probably been in their roles for a couple years now.
Yeah, and thank you for answering that question. My experience with the KUS, I've been a part of the KUS for a couple years, and right now I lead a program called Campus Connections within the KUS. But there's tons of opportunities for first-year students to get involved, whether it's just being a part of a committee and being part of like the marketing, planning, or budgeting within that committee, and just it's a great way to, I think, sample how the KUS serves its community and understand like how to connect with those resources and people and your community members within kinesiology. Speaking a little bit about your UBC experience again, how has UBC led to your career and your success today as a student? We talked a little bit about how it can help us with critical thinking, but are there any other skills that you think UBC specifically has taught you?
Trying to think specific skills that UBC has taught me. I know one thing that I've learned, again, it's something that not necessarily everyone's going to get out of UBC. Again, if you're someone who's very motivated and know exactly where you want to go, you might not get this, but it's to become comfortable with the uncomfortable, whether that be that a course you want to take isn't offered one year and then you have to figure out what you're going to do instead, or you don't get a job or volunteer opportunity, so you have to seek out something else. Getting placed in situations that you didn't think you'd be in has definitely just made me more comfortable with knowing that it's okay to not know what you want to do. But I also think that at UBC, the number of options can be overwhelming. Again, such a big campus, huge student body, virtually even, there's so much going on that it's probably tough to keep track of what all is happening within the UBC community. So just getting yourself used to those uncomfortable situations. I know there's the phrase that like you only grow once you're outside of your comfort zone, which as true as it is, UBC is definitely going to teach you that. But yeah, I think that that's what helped me as well in my journey of deciding what I wanted to continue pursuing academically or professionally. I was really put in those spots where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've got to figure out what skills I've gained from courses and work or volunteer experience and put that together and see if my result is something that meets my personal values.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for answering that one. One thing that I take forward with me as I go through my UBC experience as well is that there are a lot of opportunities here that exist within your time at UBC and taking advantage of those. I mean, specifically for me, like I get to participate in choir here, which is something that like organized choir is not something that you come across like too often, and like outside once you get back into like the workforce and other studies outside. So it's something that I've definitely taken advantage of here. And before we finish for today, I'd like to ask you, Sarah, a final question. What is the most important takeaway that you would like the audience to leave with today?
Most important takeaway would probably be, I mean, there's many parts to my main takeaway, but it's that don't let your first year be the only thing that defines your UBC experience. I know it is your first exposure to the university, and especially with things being online, it's very different than what other folks have gone through. And again, you might have not developed the relationships you thought you would. You might have not learned as much from the courses that you thought you would have and gained that hands-on experience in labs. But I would say with that, again, you've got many years ahead of you at UBC. So you've got time to grow those relationships, continue to succeed academically, and really seek out those academic supports that are available. And just make sure that, again, if something didn't happen for you in first year, you can make that happen in the many years to come.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for your advice on that. And thank you for taking the time to share your story with us today. For our students in the audience, we'll continue to offer similar events throughout winter term 2. Be sure to check out your virtual Collegia Canvas calendar for future events. All future alumni in Collegia office hours will be included there, as well as many other events and activities. I also encourage you all to visit Careers Online, the UBC hub for 10,000 coffees, as well as the UBC events calendar to stay up to date. Thank you again to our incredible speaker for sharing her experiences and insights today. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for choosing to be a part of today's Alumni Office Hour. Stay safe, everyone, until our next event. And then